Hey everyone, my name is Shanice and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm picking up on my Beatles album to book recommendation series. This time we're on album number 7, which is Revolver. It came out in August 5th, 1966, and this was the final recording project of the Beatles before they kind of called it quits on live performances. And you could really hear that freedom and that almost relief in this album when you do listen to it. They feel a little bit more free to experiment with sounds. They don't feel obliged to recreate exactly what they did in the studio on stage, so they just kind of let loose a little bit more with this. Here we have 14 original songs. 3 of them, well actually like 3.5 of them were written by George Harrison, which is, I guess, not typical. He usually just had 2, like, don't do more than 2, George. But here he got a 3rd one, and he also worked on another one. I will get to that when I get to that track. The rest were credited to Lennon and McCartney, although real authorship of each song kind of varies. So though Lennon and McCartney might make you think, oh, they worked on each song equally, is not so much the case. This album marks the start of the Beatles' psychedelic era. They were obviously experimenting with drugs, particularly LSD and marijuana, and you can hear that in the songs, through the lyrics, through the vibe. It's very fit for like counterculture music of the 60s. They started getting into Eastern philosophy and spirituality, namely George, who then kind of introduced it to the rest of the Beatles, and they were all then influenced. They were exploring themes of death and transcendence, but also like venturing into the avant-garde as well. So this stands out in the discography immediately when you get to it. Just as a work of art. You can feel the experiment, you can feel the ease. And I have to say, though, A Hard Day's Night is still probably my favorite. It just holds a very dear place in my heart. This is up there now with like one of my favorites. If it's not A Hard Day's Night, I loved Rubber Soul, and honestly this one. And I do also love Please Please Me. But this one is really a work of art. And so the cover, which was designed by Klaus Voormann, actually won the 1967 Grammy for, I think it was cover art. Doesn't exist anymore. The album itself was also nominated for Album of the Year, though it did lose to Frank Sinatra, his album A Man and His Music. So I guess this album did lose, but I guess at the least it lost to Frank Sinatra. And yeah, the last note I would say is that this album was apparently recorded after the Beatles' 3-month break. So they kind of reunited a little bit after those 3 months, and thus we get Revolver. There are, 14 tracks, so let's just dive right in to track 1. This one was written by George Harrison, one of his 3.5. And lead vocals were also by George. So this is actually kind of a political response to Prime Minister Wilson's progressive tax in the UK. Very similar to kind of progressive or more liberal philosophies of taxation here in the US, where the more your salary is, the higher your salary, the more you make, the more you pay in taxes. The more low income leaning you are, the less you pay in taxes. During Wilson's time though, it was like exaggerated. It was a super tax. So apparently the Beatles, I think they paid like 95% of their earnings to the treasury, which is just insane. I mean, they were wealthy, but I don't know, after that, doesn't seem like they were anymore. So George Harrison was in this song expressing his distaste for this, not necessarily for the philosophy of like more higher taxes for those who earned more, but he didn't want the money that he was giving to the treasury to then be used to fund the making of weapons for war. So it was more like an anti-war stance at the heart. So apparently this song was also a precursor to punk rock. I had no idea. It's all obviously influenced by psychedelic music. The book that I'm going to recommend is David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. The character in particular that I think fits the theme of the song is Uriah Heep. I'm not going to spoil the novel, but essentially Uriah, he's not a taxman in the traditional sense. He's a lawyer, but I think his kind of slimy, greedy, conniving nature fits what the song is trying to say. There are lyrics in the song that say, if you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. So you can see this taxman kind of finding a way to take advantage of a weakness, and I feel like Uriah Heep is essentially that. Just finds loopholes to work to his advantage, and he's just like a creep in the entire novel. He is like the main antagonist of David Copperfield, and you can't say that the taxman of the song isn't anything but an antagonist. So yeah, I'm going to recommend David Copperfield for track 1. And then moving on to track 2, we have one of the most recognizable Beatles songs, Eleanor Rigby. So this one lead vocals are by Paul, and this one was credited to Lennon McCartney, but majority was written by Paul with some help from John. And this is all about just lonely, forgotten people. You get a few characters, of course, Eleanor Rigby, who is an older woman who is kind of stuck in her memories and her past. She doesn't love her present, so she's kind of reminiscing to her love life. You could tell that whoever she was with or married to has passed, so she's alone. You also get a preacher who is writing a sermon that no one's really going to listen to because no one goes to church anymore. So a lot of just unheard voices and people whose stories we don't ever get to encounter. And so for this very beautiful, almost like funeral march, I'm recommending An Unnecessary Woman. This was written by the Lebanese American writer Rabih El-Medine. This is from the perspective of an older woman named Aaliyah, who is at the end of her life and alone. She's a bit cantankerous, but she spends her time in her mind, philosophizing about things, about art. She's trying to cope with her aging body and who she is now versus who she was and who she wishes that she could still be. We also get glimpses into her life in Lebanon and the Lebanese Civil War, so we get to hear the story that we don't get to hear in the song. So it's almost like getting the other perspective. And lyrically, the song reminds me a lot of A Most Peculiar Man by Simon and Garfunkel. And again, exploring just unappreciated people. And even after they die, like, no one really asks about them. So literature gives us that opportunity to be in their heads and to understand what they're thinking. So yeah, An Unnecessary Woman for this song. And I will say a cool tidbit is that George Martin, the fifth Beatle, if you will, so he arranged the strings in this song, and actually he was inspired by the score to Psycho, the Bernard Herrmann score. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and you can absolutely hear it when you listen to the song. Track 3 is called I'm Only Sleeping. This one was credited to Lennon McCartney again, and lead vocals were by John. This has a backwards lead guitar, and I think this was the first time it was used on a pop recording. So this is about sleeping and how you wish you could be sleeping, and how wanting to sleep and stay in your bed doesn't mean that you're lazy. You just want to be in the world that you create in your head when you do doze off. And that is like my anthem of every day before I have to go to work. I think we can all relate to that feeling. So for this, I am going to recommend The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker. This is a unique kind of sci-fi novel where there's a first year college student who we discover at the beginning falls asleep and just never really wakes up again. The other characters try to wake her up, paramedics try to wake her up, but she can't. And they think it's an individual problem, but then other people start just falling asleep. There's a lot of ambiguity in terms of the plot. The writing is very poetic and very beautiful. I think there's something that could be interpreted as very carefree about this book, as with the song, but in reality it's actually hitting at something a little deeper. Track 4 is called Love You Too, and lead vocals were by George and the song was written by George. So this was considered both a love song to George's wife Patty, but also to LSD. Now I'm sure Patty was thrilled that she was on the same level as drugs for her husband. It must have felt really lovely. But yeah, this is very much a counterculture song about drugs. It is very much sonically influenced by South Asian music. Here it drew from Ravi Shankar, and features, I don't know exactly how to pronounce this, but Khial vocal tradition. So again, more South Asian traditional music and culture influences here, which of course George kept for the rest of his life. And so for this, I kind of have to do it. I have to have one LSD classic, if you will. This is a nonfiction book by Tom Wolfe. This is The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. So I'm sure you guys know the author Ken Kesey, writer of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a book that I don't really love. But he was the leader of the Merry Pranksters, which was this group of like bohemians that did a lot of LSD. They traveled around the country in a really flashy school bus they called Further. This is like real. Yeah, they just had a bunch of escapades with a lot of LSD and other substances. So Tom Wolfe, as a journalist, he followed them and just chronicled all their escapades. And this is the result. And here he mentions a bunch of people like the Grateful Dead, Allen Ginsberg, to name a few. So it is pretty iconic as a 1960s piece of literature, in this case nonfiction. If you like the movie Almost Famous, I think you would appreciate this book as well. And it just fits the song's like carefree, cool vibe. The harmonies in it, it's like all of us need to love each other and, you know, be free. So it matches perfectly well. Next song, track number 5, one of my favorites honestly, is Here, There, and Everywhere. This is credited to Lennon-McCartney, but it was mainly written by Paul, and you can obviously tell, and the lead vocals are also by Paul. This song is one of Paul McCartney's favorite songs of the ones that he wrote. Very much influenced by like the Beach Boys. It is focused on living in the present, in the here and now, in experiencing everything as it comes, into being fully conscious of the moment. It is known for its vocal layering. Apparently it took 13 takes to perfect all of those layering, all those harmonies. It just sounds beautiful and epic. And like, I think classically Paul McCartney, I think of the Beatles, he has maybe the more traditional pop stylings of the rest of the Beatles. So you hear this and you can tell, yeah, Paul had his hand in this very heavily, and I loved it. I love this song. It's one of my favorites. So I am going to recommend How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe by Charles Yu. So this is of course a science fiction book, and let me just read the plot because this is a very complex and layered, if you will, book. Every day in Minor Universe 31, people get into time machines and try to change the past. That's where Charles Yu, time travel technician, steps in. He helps save people from themselves, literally. When he's not taking client calls, Yu visits his mother and searches for his father, who invented time travel and then vanished. The key to locating his father may be found in a book. It's called How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, and somewhere inside it is information that will help him. It may even save his life. So, if you've ever seen Back to the Future, you know that time travel stories as much as they adventure into the past and into the future, the lessons at the end of the day are to not travel at all. Stay in the present and value the present. You're going to have regrets if you try to change anything. So just be conscious of the moment. Exactly what the song is trying to say. And Charles Yu, I came across him through a short story in The New Yorker, which I absolutely adored. Interior Chinatown was amazing, and I read this one after I read Interior Chinatown, and Charles Yu just has just a very intimate, accessible way of writing. If you've ever watched the movie Columbus, it has that vibe, like talky, not on the surface it might seem kind of calm, but you can see a lot of internal workings going on. I really love this book. It is very complex, and yeah, I just think it shares a similar value and lesson as what the song is trying to say. Next, track number 6, another classic Beatles song, Yellow Submarine. Lead vocals by Ringo Starr, of course, credited to Lennon McCartney. Although it was mainly Paul, John helped a bit. So this is a children's song about using your imagination, about nature, about joy and innocence. It's honestly a lovely song. I'm 30 years old, but you know, I was listening to the song again today, and it's just, it brings out the child in you. It really does. And I wish I had heard this when I was a kid. I did not. I came to it much later. It does what it was trying to do. It invigorates imagination. And so I am going to recommend L.M. Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables, the first book, mainly because of, yes, of course, it is centered on a child, and her imagination runs wild, but also the scenes of nature are just so lovely. And I think this song also captures that. And colors are so vivid. All of your senses are involved. And I think this song with its, you know, background chatter and little like unique sounds happening in the backgrounds that are not necessarily instruments, but like sound effects, just engages you in many ways that I think are reminiscent of like childhood sensory awareness. Yeah, and I will say, like, so far we've now had a song by each of the Beatles. And with each song, you almost get a footprint of how these singers, songwriters are, and what they lean toward. You have here Taxman from George, who is a little bit more, I guess people thought he was like the serious, quiet Beatle. I think if all of the Beatles were alive today, I would probably be friends most with George, because I am also very serious and pretty quiet. But you know, with Taxman, you get his political leanings. He was always morally, ethically driven kind of singer-songwriter. He didn't just want to make music just for kicks. He like really had a mission, and he lived his life to a certain ideal. So I really appreciated that about George. And then you get Eleanor Rigby and Here, There, and Everywhere. Paul songs, if you will. Again, kind of like traditional in their songwriting and just beautiful. He has a very beautiful way of telling stories that I love. And then with John, you have I'm Only Sleeping. Like I said, can be superficially kind of like fun, but actually it's saying something really deep, and it has a bit of experiment going on within the catchy tune. And then of course Yellow Submarine with Ringo. He is a ball of energy and he's not afraid to tap into that like childhood point of view. So far I think this album has done a good job of like giving us who each Beatle is. Moving on to track number 7, She Said, one of my favorites again, but I can honestly say that about like practically all of the songs. So leads are by John, credited to Lennon McCartney, but this is the one that actually John mainly wrote with the help of George. So looks like Paul McCartney didn't really have a hand in this one, but it was George, but George didn't really get credit for it. I guess this is inspired by a funny story. Peter Fonda, the famed actor, he was at a party that the Beatles happened to be invited to. Everyone there did, you know, some drugs, LSD in particular, as will be a theme for most of this album. And in his LSD trip, his being Peter's, he starts talking about death and like all these really deep subjects, and he's talking to John Lennon, and John is like, my God, this guy's like bringing the mood down, get him out of here. And I think Peter was actually kicked out of the party. And so in writing the song, they changed he said to she said. Hence she said as the title. In addition to kind of the I know what it's like to be dead lyric, it does bring a moment of like contemplation, and fear of the unknown, and fear of being inadequate, that is also seeped in there. And again, it's like a fun kind of rompy kind of song, but underneath there's something like really existentially troubling about it. Like, it's very John Lennon. So I'm going to recommend a short story by Neil Gaiman called How to Talk to Girls at Parties. And in short, it is about these geeky British kids in the 70s named Anne and Vic, who want to meet girls, and they have a very like stereotypical version of what girls are supposed to be. They go to these parties to meet them. The girls are never as they imagined. Can you believe? And I think, you know, the short story does look at like the weird, funny, unpredictable conversations that happen at parties that you never expect, that can bring the mood down, that can excite things. But I think similarly, you know, there's depth here to the story. It's not just, you know, some funny little short fiction. You know, it's very well written and fun to analyze, I think. So the next song, track number 8, is Good Day Sunshine. Lead vocals by Paul, credited to Lennon McCartney, but it was really just written by Paul. So this is kind of, you know, exactly what you think it's about. It celebrates love and sunshine. It's very chanty, it's very positive. And for this one, given its focus on like the sun and summer and heat and love and all of that, I'm gonna recommend Belladonna by Anbara Salam. I actually think I've recommended this book before, but it's so good I'm gonna recommend it again, because why not? This is about 2 young girls in a Connecticut boarding school who get accepted to this prestigious other boarding school in Italy, and they both go, and it's a coming of age tale. They discover themselves, they explore their queerness, they explore who they are in summertime in Italy. You have the sun, you have the love, you have the introspection. Yeah, I think it's a perfect summer book, and I think this song is perfect on a sunny day. I listened to this on my walk this morning. It's blazing outside. And even though this is not like my favorite Beatles song ever, or on the album, it's not a bad song. But, you know, if I'm gonna pick like a song to listen to from this album, it's probably not gonna be Good Day Sunshine. But it fit the mood on my walk. It like elevated my experience, and I felt really bouncy and positive walking in the blazing sun. After this, you have the very confusing And Your Bird Can Sing. Who is it written by mainly? Who do you think? John Lennon. Credited though to Lennon McCartney, and sung, lead vocal sung by John Lennon, of course. Very oblique lyrics. My interpretation, now I've written this down because it changes all the time. It seems like one person in this relationship in this song is happy, but still doesn't fully understand the other person in the relationship. Their overwhelming luck turns around. It's like a reversal of fortune. And now they kind of need the other person, but even in need, they don't fully appreciate what the other person is doing. So miscommunication to the max. It could easily be interpreted a different way, because if you just look up the lyrics, it's very confusing. And I'm also interpreting bird as like a young lady, but also I guess, you know, why not a bird, like tweet, tweet, tweet kind of bird. So for this one, because it's confusing and it has reversal of fortunes and, or in my interpretation it does, and like switched roles, I am choosing Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, made into the amazing movie The Handmaiden. I'm not gonna say anything about this plot other than it's about Susan Tinder, who was orphaned and raised by like a very good pickpocketer and con artist, or like a leader of pickpockets and other con artists. And Susan is learned in the craft. And so her plan is to swindle a daughter of a very wealthy family. And these two women then form an unexpected bond. That's all I'm saying. Plot twist after plot twist after plot twist. Such an amazing book. Also watched The Handmaiden. Super amazing adaptation. I actually watched the movie before the book. It'll be interesting, now it's been a few years since I both read the book and seen the movie, how I would react if I flip the order. Like if I reread the book first and then like decided to watch the movie again. I don't know, but I think utter miscommunication and the reversal of fortunes, I think matches this song very, very well. Next might be my favorite song on the album. I don't know, there are just so many good ones, but this one is called For No One. Lead vocals sung by Paul and credited to Lennon McCartney, but really it was mainly written by Paul. This is a Baroque take on an end of a relationship, and this is a song where actually John Lennon and George were not featured at all in the creation of the song, which is very interesting. But the book that I'm going to recommend, since the song is namely about the end of a relationship, is If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. My favorite novel of the year thus far. What can I say? It's about an unnamed American or Egyptian American woman who chooses to move to Cairo to spend some time there, kind of discovering her own culture. Her family immigrated from Egypt to the US. There she meets a young man who goes by Shobrahit Boy in the book. We never know his name, but they form a kind of relationship. This Shobrahit Boy he comes from poverty. They're just of different classes, and it is like post-colonialism made into fiction. Superb, remarkable language, sentences, and a unique way of looking at the unfolding of a very, very quick and short-lived relationship. Any chance I get to recommend this book, I'm going to use it, and this is for a phenomenal song also. Honestly, For No One is one of my favorite Beatles songs ever. Next is Dr. Robert, a song with lead vocals by John, credited to Lennon McCartney in lyrics. This one is not about a doctor. It is about some drugs. So drug references to the max. Kind of this Dr. Robert person is like a Dr. Feelgood type of character. And for this, I did a little research on the song. And apparently this was inspired by a character in the novel that I'm going to recommend for this track is Island, by Aldous Huxley. Of course, writer of Brave New World, which it's been like over a decade since I read that book, so perhaps time to revisit, since, you know, who knows what's going to happen in the election this year in the US. So this is Huxley's final novel, and in it we go to this remote island called Pala. On this island, for the past 120 years, this particular group of people have survived and flourished. It's been largely untouched, but of course greedy capitalism and outside society sees the success and wants part of it. A way to infiltrate is this group of like newspapermen who get shipwrecked on the island. And so on this island there is a Dr. Robert who administers drugs And on this island, these drugs facilitate social bonding and elevate the minds. They are a channel towards enlightenment. You can kind of see where that interpretation is going. I could easily also put that crazy psychiatrist from My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. That woman just administers drugs like there's no tomorrow. Next is the song I Want to Tell You, and this was sung primarily by George and written by George. What do you know? This one was inspired by LSD, and this is kind of like a stream of consciousness, lots of thoughts that he has to write down, that he has to get off his mind. He has difficulty in finding things meaningful, hard time communicating. He's on the search for an increased awareness. That's kind of the gist of what the lyricism is about. And so for this, I'm recommending a book that I finished today, actually. It's called A Minor Chorus by Billy Ray Belcourt. This book is not plot heavy. It's mainly a character study. It follows this brilliant young man, this young queer Cree man who is in the middle of a PhD and kind of puts it on pause to write fiction. And really what he's trying to do is explore how in fiction to capture a plural first person singular voice. How to capture the experience of a community in an I. And a lot of the book is him working on the novel. So the novel we get is his process of figuring out what to write about for the novel. And again, like an avalanche of thoughts on the page of Belcourt's questionings and insecurities and investigations. There's not a lot of certainty. Even on the last page, we don't get that. And I think that's reminiscent of what the song is trying to say as well. Track number 13 is called Got to Get You Into My Life. And this is credited to Lennon McCartney, mainly written by Paul, and lead vocals are by Paul. And this has a Motown feel to it. Can you believe this is actually an ode to marijuana? It could be interpreted as a song to a crush or lover or something, but actually no, it is about drugs. It was inspired by Earth, Wind and Fire. Like I said, it's very Motown heavy. And did you know that Joe Pesci, the actor, is also a musician and he covered the song? That was news to me in my research of this album, but I thought that was a cool tidbit. I am going to recommend Post Traumatic by Chantal V. Johnson. Now, I will admit I didn't actually really like this book. That doesn't mean it does not fit the song. And mainly it's in the main character and her best friend's casual use of marijuana. It's a way to commune, it's a way to share experiences, it's a way to bring them together, explore art. Having these moments with her friends are necessary to her mental well-being in a world where she's trying to navigate trauma and, well, PTSD in a way. Getting home with her friend to watch some shows while, you know, smoking a little bit. That is her quiet space, that is her solace. I think it brings a unique interpretation of, you know, using or doing drugs that isn't negative. It's just casual and, in fact, good for some people's mental health. Though the song could be kind of a joke, you know, I think they were having some fun with it. I think you can also interpret it in a more positive way too. And then track number 14. What an incredible song. What an incredible song. So heavily influenced again by South Asian music. This one is called Tomorrow Never Knows, and it was lead vocals were sung by John, credited to Lennon McCartney, but really John Lennon wrote it. This is actually the first song recorded for the album. This is the song that most takes advantage of what a studio session can do versus what live performance can do. This song embodies the Beatles' quest with this album to experiment in the studio and not feel obliged to actually do that in front of an audience. This is about LSD again. It's not a shock by this point. It was inspired by a Tibetan book and inspired by Indian culture, like I said. It centers on the expansion of the mind and anti-materialism and of course Eastern spirituality. So for this, I think an apt recommendation is When I'm Gone, Look for Me in the East. And this is by Quan Barry. So let me read the summary for this one. Tasked with finding the reincarnation of a great lama, a spiritual teacher who may have been born anywhere in the vast Mongolian landscape, the young monk Chulun sets out with his identical twin Moon, who has rejected the monastic life they once shared. Their relationship will be tested on this journey through their homeland as each possesses the ability to hear the other's thoughts. What doesn't say mind expansion than being able to read into somebody else's mind and share that spiritual telepathic connection with somebody? Yes, and of course it does explore Eastern spiritualities. This is a very lyrical, experimental kind of book. It's not straightforward in narration or time or timeline. It jumps around. Of course, that's centered to this kind of spirituality. And because it's, you know, death is kind of part of the experience of reading this book, of the story, of the plot, and of the title. And given that track 14 is the last song on this incredible album, it's like a closing. But even in the closing, look forward to the next beginning. It's like, it's a great way to tie in the theme of the song, I think, to my recommendation. So I'm very proud of this one, I have to admit. And yes, album number 7, Revolver, is done. I cannot stress enough how incredible this album is. If you haven't listened to it, please do. Top 3. I think this might be, I don't know, my second favorite. I don't know. Maybe at the end I will rank my taste in the Beatles albums, but I don't know, it's too difficult at the moment. But Revolver is excellent. It's definitely up there. So the next album is a big album for the Beatles, so I know I'm gonna have a lot of fun picking out some book recommendations for that one. I'm gonna try to do that one maybe later this month, maybe next month, actually, more likely. Maybe it'll be too soon to put it out after this one. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you now have a few new book titles to look for when you go to the bookstore next, or the library. Support your local libraries, everyone. And yeah, thank you as always for watching. I really love making the series, and we're almost done. I have a few more albums, of course, but you know, I've already explored 7. That's incredible. I'm gonna value this journey with the Beatles very, very much. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.